Hey, family, welcome to episode 8 of my enrolled agent career. In today's episode, we're going to take a little bit of a pivot, right? So, when I first introduced the podcast, I told you that I was going to bring different guests on from a variety of backgrounds, not just people who have accounting degrees, not just people who want to have and run their own firms, but people of all ages, people who are in corporate America, people that you can identify with. And today, I'm pleased to bring my very first guest who is actually younger than me. I hope they don't mind me sharing that. But the reason that's interesting to me is because we have a gap right now in accounting. And although tax and accounting aren't the same, there is also a gap in the tax industry as well, where we have younger adults who are not interested in participating in tax or accounting. So, with no further ado, I would like to introduce you to Dannie Lynn Murphy.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Hi, I'm excited to have you on today. So, you heard the intro. I'm excited because I like to see other people who are relatively close to me in age who are interested in the tax industry.
Yes, it's good to see.
So, one of the questions I always start out with my guests is how did you find out about the EA credential and what made you decide to take the EA exam?
Great questions. And just as you alluded to in your introduction, my answer here is an odd one. So I I went to undergrad in a very small town. In my senior year of undergrad, I was looking for a job. I had been working as an overnight manager at McDonald's, and the overnight life was just kicking my butt. And there was an H&R Block office in the small town, and they came to campus and were talking about post grad careers. And I was like, well, wait a minute. What if you hired me now? Because I only had class 1 day a week at the time. I had all my classes on a single day, so I could offer them 6 days of availability if they needed it. So I ended up working a single tax season at H&R Block that senior year, just as a regular schmegular tax associate. And then kind of fell off the tax life. That was 2013. And then in 2020, I was looking for additional income and got a seasonal part time job at Intuit, again as a tax associate. Worked that first season and then learned, oh, you can be a seasonal manager at Intuit. And as someone who has social anxiety, doesn't love being on the phone with customers, but is like passionate about all of the HR components of this, I was like, immediately, yes, what do I have to do? And they were like, well, you need a credential. You need an EA, a JD, or a CPA. And I was like, shoot. They at the time had, I believe they still do, had a program that provided study materials. And at the time, they paid for your exams. Now they offer a bonus once you complete the exams.
Okay.
So I enrolled in the program, studied, and in a 7 day window, took all three exams. I did fail the
Oh my
business on the
goodness.
first try, but retook it. So I took four. I took SCE one, two, three, two, because I had to take business twice in a 7 day window, passed, and then returned to Intuit the next season as a seasonal manager. And that's what I've done all along. So found out about it because I wanted a promotion at my seasonal job, and took and passed the exams all in a 7 day window.
Oh my goodness. So, there's a lot here for me to unload.
Sure
The
is.
first thing, I was like, all of your college classes in one day? That's intense, but
It was
we kind of see a
great.
pattern here.
Yes.
Oh my
Yeah.
goodness. So, what did you major in college?
So I have, I have 4 degrees. When I was in high school, I did dual enrollment, and so I have an associate's in general science. Then I went to college, transferred all of those associate credits, and my bachelor's is in media and marketing management. So the creative side of business, like comms, marketing design, etc. And then I have a master's and a doctorate in HR. So, to your introduction, I have no accounting degree. I actually failed my one and only accounting class in college. We had to do a business, a semester long project doing the books for a business on the basis of the dude from the movie The Big Lebowski.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
and I struggled with that project. So, no, no successful formal accounting education for sure.
Okay, so with what you were doing, working overnight at McDonald's, you said that was kicking your butt. So that's pretty good motivation to find a different job. But when they were talking, when H&R Block came and they were talking about postgraduate careers, what was it other than just wanting something that wasn't overnight that attracted you to them?
It was a job that it was basically like college kid mentality, to be honest. They talked about how during tax season, it was a lot of hours. I was only on campus during tax season, so I didn't need something year round, and I was about to graduate. And so I did end up working 60 plus hours a week for H&R Block because this conversation was in November of my senior year. So then obviously in December, I did H&R Block training, January through April, worked the tax season. And then I graduated 2 weeks later and said goodbye. So in my mind, it was like, oh, I need a job for 5 months. H&R Block is offering a job with many, many hours that only lasts the next 5 months. This is perfect. And even though my degree was in marketing, I was in the economics and management department. And so I was able to make and I was in the economics honor society because of being in that department. So I was able to argue that even though I wasn't an accounting major, I could do this.
Oh my god, that's impressive. So my first busy season, I worked 70, 80 hours a week. And yeah, they had it something on the college side where they put it in like I had an internship, so I was still enrolled. There's no way I could have done a full-time schedule and tax season. So kudos to you for that. Later on, when you were looking for the additional income in 2020, this is something else that's like super impressive, which I'll fill people in. Between that season in 2013 and 2020, we had the Tax Cut and Job Act. So, in addition to like trying to transition back into tax prep, how was that like huge change? Because we have changes with the credit amounts, we don't have exemptions anymore. What was that like for you?
I had been loosely familiar with it. So from I graduated undergrad in 2014. I did work 1 year full time in marketing. And then I was a full time entrepreneur for just under 3 years. So the 3 years that I was a full time entrepreneur, I was unfortunately deep in my own taxes. I had multiple LLCs, so I had multiple Schedule Cs. So I was navigating all of that. And then in 2017, I returned to corporate America, but I didn't stop all of my businesses. So starting in 2017, I had my full-time income, I had RSUs to contend with, restricted stock units. I still had multiple LLCs. So even though I wasn't doing tax as a job, just for my own edification, I was having to keep up on all of it because if I wasn't, I would be paying someone else, likely an EA, a lot of money to help me navigate corporate income, RSUs, multiple LLCs, all on a single tax return. So it was honestly selfish in keeping up on everything for that decade until 2020 rolled around, just for my own edification. So I wasn't too far removed in a roundabout way.
That's cool. Okay. Yeah, that's another thing when you mentioned that gap, I was like, "Oh my goodness, like to not have been kept up with all the changes." But that makes sense. So also with that, like I said, there was a lot that I have to unpack here. When you went to into it, can you kind of explain what that process is like for people who may not even be aware of the fact that they have a program? Because you went from being an H&R Block in person with your coworkers, potentially with clients as well, to working remotely with your coworkers and clients as well. So, how was that? Like, what does that process look like, and how was that for you?
Yeah, I fortunately had already gotten some familiarity with it from my corporate America job because we had gone remote in March of 2020. And
Mm-hmm.
I was already familiar with working with folks across the globe. So that piece of it was pretty straightforward. The catching up on the tax knowledge for sure was wild. So Intuit does most of their hiring in the summer for the next tax season. I didn't learn about the role until October, I want to say. So I was a pretty late hire. And I started in January. So I it was already tax season when I was doing my training. But when you onboard, there's a significant training period. It was 3 weeks. Now it's about 17 days 40 plus hours of training, both live and self-led, before you actually. And then when I was onboarding, there was a live test out, so to speak, with the next level role. So you actually joined a Zoom call with someone and did two mock calls and were evaluated on the advice you gave customers. So in all of that training, I was able to feel really comfortable. And then mid late January, I was starting to support customers. And then halfway through my first season, Intuit was launching their full service program. And so I switched from being a tax associate to being in the full service pilot. And so I was preparing customers' returns starting in late February. So it was a lot in just a few months, but had all of the education and the support on the back end. Um, to be honest, I couldn't also imagine learning how to navigate a remote working world on top of that. I was fortunate to already have that experience because, to your point, you're not in person with anyone. So it's Slack, Zoom, like getting support from folks asynchronously a lot typically.
Gotcha. Um, yeah, and like I said, it appears that you thrive in that world of having a lot at the same time. Just from back in college when you shared about working at H&R Block full time and taking a full load of classes for the semester. With that, we're fast forwarding to 2020. How did you balance? I think everybody kind of struggled a little bit after COVID. I know for me and my husband, we're like, oh, we're in the house for 2 weeks. Like, we're going to find shows to binge watch. And then it turned into 3 weeks. And it was like, oh, shoot, like, this isn't a vacation anymore. How did you balance COVID? You mentioned already you work in corporate America, that was already remote, and transitioning to becoming an EA. Because after you found out about the leadership role, hey, we're going to take that test. So, how do you balance all of that?
Yeah, lots of folks talk about work-life balance. That's not a thing for me. I talk about work-life integration, just like weaving all of the pieces together so that they fit well. As you alluded to, COVID and everything, my wife and I met in 2020. We were dating long distance. So navigating a long distance relationship because of the protections of 2020, she lived in Minnesota, I lived in Chicago. So it was a 13-hour train ride to go see her because neither of us were comfortable flying at the time. The upside of the 13-hour train ride, plenty of time to work, plenty of time to study, plenty of time to get things done. I definitely remember taking some work calls on that Amtrak train ride for sure. But really just work life integration, finding ways to nudge all of the pieces in amongst each other, because in my world there's no such thing as balance, unfortunately. So just weaving all of the pieces together as best I could, and also very much embracing a mentality of done is better than perfect. We get
Mm,
really, really, really caught up in perfection. And I've had to remind myself repeatedly, C's get degrees. Done is better than perfect. Obviously not letting things that are harmful fall, but like you don't need to reread the email 3 times. Probably whatever you type out the first time is good to go. Like that sort of thing.
I got you. I like that concept and phrase. I probably need to apply it to my own life because after 35 years, I still haven't found the balance between it all. I need to find, like, just be cool with, okay, it's not going to always balance, but integrating that. Thank you. I have a takeaway. I hope everybody else uses that too. Um, so we met each other virtually. The internet and technology is so cool till it's not, because you get to meet other people, do things like this podcast. So we met each other through NAEA, the National Association of Enrolled Agents. I was on the nominating committee for last year, and you were and are again a member of the board. So, congratulations. Welcome back to the board for fiscal 25-26 year. How do you choose the organizations and things that you'll participate in with your work life integration, not balance?
Yeah, NAEA was an accident, but an accident that I'm happy to be involved in. So when I got my EA, I then was thinking strategically, I need to like optimize the best way to get my CEs, right? Because have a full-time job, work seasonally into it, have other things going on. What is the most efficient way for me to get my CEs every year? And someone at Intuit shared with me the NAEA Summit. And so
Oh,
6 months
cool.
after getting my EA, I was registering for the summit and I was like, oh, I can get a discount if I become a member and I'm an EA. So I guess I'm going to become a member of this thing. And I went to the summit that first year. And I am autistic and have a hearing disability. And so
Okay.
I went to Summit, participated in Summit, and afterwards I sent an email to the then education director. And I was like, hey, just wanted to share some feedback. Like, as someone with a hearing disability, is there a way to like have closed captioning in the sessions? As someone who's autistic, like, here's some suggestions for the social moments. And that email turned into me volunteering to like provide some guidance because my day job is disability accessibility, which then turned into me being nominated to the board to be that advocate, which has now turned into 2 going on 3 years of serving on the board specifically through that POV. So I say it was a happy accident, because I've been able to kind of be this voice. And now I also lead the new member task force. So we're thinking about different ways to support new and young EAs within NAEA too. So for me, it was a little bit of feedback turned into this multi-year volunteerism. But I feel like that's how good volunteerism goes, right? You need to be passionate about the thing. So.
Absolutely. And I can say for myself, I appreciate the work that you do because when people, I'll say people that are 40 and under, typically when they think of accountant, tax professional, it's almost like an elite club. So, like, if you have anything that's quote unquote wrong, and when I say quote unquote wrong, I mean just different, like you don't meet the status quo of what people think of with tax professional, like you don't belong. And that is not the case at all. And I think that's, no, I know that's one of the things that I love about the EA designation is that we have the authority through the IRS to help people and impact their lives. And the barrier to becoming an EA It's lower than CPA, and I'm trying not to go into the whole CPA EA debate and debacle. But it does allow more people who may think differently, learn differently, to still help and receive the credential. So I think with the efforts that you are making with NAEA, we are becoming an organization that actually embodies that. So thank you for me.
Thank you for that too. It's so true. I was completely unaware of the EA designation prior to the like Intuit, I want to be a manager conversation. And it's so true. You don't need a degree. You really, like to me, the qualifiers for an EA is like a heart for service and a grounding in some mathematics and accounting fundamentals. But it's very accessible in that regard, especially with the scholarships out there for the exams themselves. And so to your point, it's a great accessible career path. And so ensuring that folks are aware of that is super important.
Yeah, so I mentioned this before, and I don't want to forget. And when I say before, I mean before we start recording. How do you, and I feel like you're going to give me another cool concept like work life integration, but how do you, I guess, navigate the world, the tax world, being somebody that is not a Gen Xer or boomer? Because if we look at the accounting industry, we're getting some younger professionals in. Like I'm 35, but if we look at the average age, we're looking at like 20 years older than me. And we have a lot of the industry that's retiring. Do you see that as a challenge in being a younger tax professional, or is it something that is difficult to navigate?
I think it's a little bit of both and. I think the first like shock and awe in the accounting industry is when we started A, having conversations about crypto, and B, 2020 happened. Because folks who had had in-person practices for decades needed to pivot and pivot quickly. And I don't remember, and I'm so bad at crypto, which is ironic. But there was that first big sell off where folks my age who had bought crypto for funsies in like 2015 had their first big sell off, making significant money that needed to be reported to the IRS. Those two things I think opened up or were like the first like crack in the eggshell of this conversation. Um,
Mm-hmm.
to help with the both sides of it, right? There are so many things about tax that you won't fundamentally understand until you've experienced it. And so there's this rich and storied knowledge that can't be taught or can be taught but is going to come with some pain. And so if you could learn from others experience, it's great. But then inversely, you have folks of my generation. So I sit squarely on the cusp of Gen Z and Millennial, depending on which website's definition you're using today. um, uh, Folks in my generation have the W 2 income, the 1099 income, they're Instagram influencing on the side, they're this, they're that. And so my generation, we're seeing folks have much more complex tax situations much earlier in life than we would have seen before. And so my generation is kind of like the adoption of technology. We're a lot more comfortable with complex tax situations than um, other generations would have been this early on.
Mm-hmm.
But that also makes us prime for mistakes, which is where we need the storied experience to help us with that. So I think it's a balance. There also can sometimes be a little, um, I guess, shock and awe of you've had multiple LLCs for 15 years and you're how old? Um, so there's a little bit of like how did you do that so early? I have an internet acquaintance online who owned vending machines at 8 years old. And so they're in their early 30s now, right? And that means they've had multiple LLCs for 22 years. And then they sold those vending machines to another young girl who now runs that as her business. And so they're 30-ish years old and have sold a very profitable business already. And there's a little bit of around that. So it's a very, very long answer, but it's a balance between having respect for this rich experience that in a lot of ways can't be taught and is only learned through like the pain of the experience sometimes, and also just the cultural shift in what it means to make a living, and
Yes.
understanding that like my our generation is a lot more creative, a lot more diversified. We also grew up terrified of the economy. Like, we don't want all of our eggs in one basket. And so we diversified our
Exactly.
income early. And so just having and building some respect for the way that we are managing our financial lives too. Yeah.
I got you. Yeah. And I know it was a loaded question, so your answer was not too long. But you mentioned being on the cusp of Gen Z and Millennial. I'm smack dab in the middle of Millennial. So I have cousins that are older than me who like never had a cell phone in high school. And then I have family members that have just always had technology and Wi Fi. And like I remember getting on AOL and like the dial up and wanting to talk to my friends on AIM. Something else that's interesting though for me, and I don't know if your experience was the same in H&R Block because people are coming in. When I first started in the accounting industry, the firm I was at in 2011, we had a whole floor that was for storage. And we had or not envelopes, binders. So the person's tax return and their source documents are all there, ticked and tied and labeled. So I learned how to do taxes that way. Now we fast forward and people have paperless offices. So sometimes when I look at kind of, I guess, it's not an education gap because you wouldn't learn that in CE, but I look at the knowledge gap that people have. I was like, this is why we need to be able to embrace both generations so that we get the best of both. Because people at that first firm would be like, well, you would do your digital file the same way you would do your binder. Whereas I've worked with younger tax professionals who are like, oh, yeah, I have it all in the folder. And I'm like, it's not organized. It's not a digital binder. But that's just one of the things for like the sake of efficiency, where it's like, yes, we need to respect both sides, understand we both can learn and pivot here and be able to move forward. Um, what advice would you give to a younger generation? So I'll say millennial, Gen Z, EA, who is trying to build their own business. Not necessarily business. I would say brand. And I chose that word if you want to talk about more about other stuff that you do, but that wants to build their own brand right now as an EA. Like, what advice would you give to them?
I would give two big pieces. So a decade plus ago, when I worked at H&R Block, we were trained on forms-based filing. And then today at Intuit, it's interview-based filing. So it's less about the exact form and more about like the interview of the taxpayer's year. Uh, I think EAs coming into the profession need a firm grasp on both. They need to
Mm-hmm.
have a really good understanding of this form is used for this purpose, and here are the complexities, and here's the specific line on this form that can really change the outcome of the entire form. And also being able to have that dialogue with their customer, understand their broader tax picture, especially because Gen Z serves Gen Z. So being able to have those complex conversations about like multiple income streams, and you need to report all of them, and how do you keep all of these income
Yeah.
streams organized? And if you have W-2 income and non-W-2 income, how do they support each other? All of those pieces.
Hmm.
So I think familiarity with both deep, rich familiarity with the forms, deep, rich familiarity with a conversational interview style of engaging in the tax process will be super supportive to them. But then in terms of brand, when we think about brand, we might think about the TikTok tax influencers. Um, and I say that with a smile because there are the questionable TikTok tax influencers, and then I think about folks like Ruben who have such good tax advice across social and making it accessible in multiple languages too. Your brand can be as broader as niche as you want it to be, as broader as niche as it can or should be based on what you're offering. And so
Hmm.
understand where your passion intersects with the tax work too. So Ruben is someone who I feel like does a really good job of talking about representation, talking about being strategic. He's touching on multiple points of the tax experience. But maybe your specific niche is helping the person who has W 2 and self employed income maximize their situation. And so you're talking about like the dual income, not dual married, dual income filer, like multi source income filer. And just know how your passion intersects with what you do, and then how you want to talk about that and have a clear position on it too. Is Those are the two big things I would say, because I think sometimes Gen Z gets a little too far away from the forms based tax knowledge, and we need that. We need to be rooted in that, and we need to be rooted in a clear tax code informed position on whatever we're talking about too.
Yeah, thank you. And like you said earlier, especially with the adoption of technology, there are just more complex tax situations that older generations may not be accustomed to or used to. I had a client I worked with who was just getting railed with taxes. And when I was looking at their stuff, their tax professional was reporting their YouTube income and influencer income as hobby. So
Oh
if
my
you know,
goodness.
you
I
know.
mean,
I was like, you're actually making it like you don't do anything else. And they were like, yeah, but they said all I'm doing is videos, so it's a hobby.
oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Profit intent, business intent. Whew. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I definitely appreciate with, like I said, corporate America, board stuff. I don't know what all else you got going on. You making the time to be here with me today. I do have one last question. If there was anything that you could redo or not do in your journey as an enrolled agent, what would that be?
It's funny because I led with this in my journey. I wouldn't have taken all three exams in 7 days. Um, I,
That's a
I
good one.
was I was highly incentivized by like the processes and the timelines that be in that moment. But like in hindsight, I am certain that there is information I missed. I am certain that the way in which I passed those exams was more about test strategy than it was about tax knowledge. And
Mhm.
have definitely seen myself in the past 5 years making sure that I am well rounded in my knowledge as a result. And so I would have encouraged prior me to like have a better understanding of what that path was going to look like. Maybe
Mhm.
shared with my manager into it sooner that I was interested in being a manager, so that like maybe I could have started studying during the tax season instead. Just getting a better understand. I don't regret it in the slightest, but certainly had to play catch up after the fact as a result.
That makes sense. Yeah, 7 days is crazy. People ask me like, "Can I take them at one time?" It's like you can, but will you actually retain the stuff you're studying? I don't know. That's not my story. But again, thank you so much for being here. I know you have so much going on, so I greatly appreciate it. If anyone would like to connect with you online, how could they go about doing that?
Yes, I tax is not my full-time thing. I don't have a website to point you to, but I am at Dannie Lynn Fountain across LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. That's the place to find me. The only one of those where I actually talk about tax stuff is Instagram, but all of those are great places to find me.
Well, thank you very much. I will make sure for the people who may be listening and not watching that that is in the show notes. Appreciate you. And I don't know, maybe we'll have to have you come back on as stuff evolves with this big, beautiful tax bill.
Oh, yes. Sounds
All right.
good. Thank you.
Thank you, Danny Lynn.